right, well, good morning, everyone, and it's wonderful to be with you today. I'm Julie Ross, and I have the honor of serving as Virginia Tech's Dean of Engineering. And really, to kick us off today, I'd like to just start with some brief introductions by our panel. Maybe start by just introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about the role at your organizations, and maybe we'll just start here and go down the line.
Sure. Ray Hensberger. I am the global head of machine learning and generative AI at AWS for a professional services organization where we advise global clients on their machine learning and artificial intelligence approaches to driving their business outcomes. That's everything from maybe sales to delivery of solutions, building, designing those solutions on a global scale. And that's across a lot of different industries. So we see things in automotive sectors, healthcare and life sciences, financial services, media and entertainment, sports, you name it. We are playing a role typically with customers in those spaces.
Great, thank you.
My name is Steve Brown. I'm the global head of solution engineering for Data Cloud within Salesforce. And just want to say thank you to Virginia Tech and thank you to the state of Virginia. I'm a public school kid from kindergarten to graduate school. 4 of those years as part of the original founding class of a little public-private partnership called Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. And spent 15 years of that career helping build some startups here in the DC area, some more successfully than others. And the last 9 years at Salesforce, 8 of those building our analytics practice within Salesforce, and then stepped in to lead Data Cloud solution engineering a year ago. And if you haven't heard of solution engineering as a career, you or your kids or your friends, it's an awesome job. It's the best job in the world. It's the pre-sales part of technology. And it's the greatest career nobody's ever heard of.
Best kept secret. Hi, I'm Naren Ramakrishnan. I'm a professor of computer science and director of the Sangani Center for AI and Analytics. I'm located right here in the DC region in our Arlington building, soon to be moving to our innovation campus. We have faculty from both campuses engaged in many aspects of research and education in AI, machine learning, data science.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eric Breckenfeld. I'm the Director of Technology Policy at NVIDIA, actually also located just here in the DC area, right over by Union Station. NVIDIA is an accelerated computing company. We produce what are commonly called GPUs, or graphical processing units. Those GPUs are responsible for a lot of the training that happens at the data center level and a lot of the inferencing that happens when you go and actually use platforms like a GPT or something like that. More recently than that, we've started to move into actual platform, AI platform development, mostly business to business. So we work with other companies to help them stand up their own AI systems, which of course is an exciting area and very much the topic of what we're here to talk about today.
Great, well, thank you all. And for the next 35 minutes or so, we're really gonna talk a lot about data and decisions and the role of AI in that. And really, to get us started, Ray and Steve, I'm gonna start with a question to you about how your organizations are leveraging foundation models, and maybe share with us a little bit how workflows are being disrupted already, and what do you think is coming next? What's on the horizon for us? So let's maybe start here.
Sure. So we work with customers in a lot of different industries and sectors, but we also have our own internal processes and things that we do, for sure, across such a large business that we have. And you kind of heard a little bit about it, I think, earlier, but when it comes to the foundation models and their use, I mean, it's really about what's the business outcome that we're trying to achieve. Internally at AWS, it's being more efficient in our processes, and that's everything from document summarization and meeting notes to understanding, okay, from a marketing perspective, how do we generate creative and new ideas that will drive kind of what's next and on the horizon. So a lot around our efficiencies as an organization, and specifically within professional services, how do you make better use of your time? How do you make yourself more cost effective with your customers and get things done faster? And that includes coding, as you can imagine, within an organization. There's a lot of efficiencies to be gained there. So leveraging the technology in that space. And it's similar with our customers. So we have customers that are looking to make efficiencies in their business outcomes. And so you hear the starter points around, I think, chatbots, and you hear things around, how do we be more efficient in our manufacturing processes and what is important to their businesses. And there's a lot to be gained there, a lot of automation. Looking forward and what's next, I mean, it's shifting into, I think, more of the multimodal use of these foundation models. There's a couple things. I mean, the foundation models are super large. I think we all know that with these large language models. But having the more refined models, the more smaller language models that are tied into and targeted towards a specific domain, that are fine-tuned with customer data, I mean, that's really where these things are going. And then shift that from just text-based to image-based to both, where you can provide text and images and it gives you some sort of response to that is a lot of what we're seeing next on the horizon.
Great, thank you. Steve?
So Salesforce is all about providing kind of the last mile of value for AI for businesses. And our number one value is trust. And it seems these days in a space that's moving as rapidly as AI, it's a good thing to fall back on the values that don't change and apply that as a lens. So you and I talked about this a little bit, Julie. So when we looked at GPT, and that took the world by storm a couple of years ago, we applied that lens of trust. And so one of the first things we invested in was the Einstein trust layer to wrap all of the interaction with an LLM in a layer of trust so that our business customers know that they can trust that the responses. So what that looks like is Salesforce. We do customer relationship management. We've got sales and service people that are marketers and in our technology every day. And like a basic use case is, okay, a salesperson wants to send an email to a prospect. Well, they might want some help generating that. Well, you don't want them to go to a foundation model, an LLM directly, because then those corporate secrets can be leaked to the LLM and they use it to train the model. So instead, they choose, yep, I want to send an email. We actually come down into our system, into Data Cloud. We know that customer that they want to communicate with. We know how long they've been a customer. We know their recent orders. We know how, what their latest survey results are. We can use that to then ground a prompt, right? To ask a really good question of the LLMs. And so we build this great question. We ask the LLM, and it can be any one of a number of different LLMs. It could be public, OpenAI, Anthropic. Could be one of ours. We have our own LLMs that are CRM specific. Could be one of our customers. They can bring their own LLM. But all of that in this circle of trust. That means they don't use it to train the model. They don't log that information. We strip out all of any kind of a personally identifiable information when we pass that. And we do toxicity detection and other things. So we're innovating around the process around these foundation models, letting our customers choose which ones to use and offering options, but to make sure it's done responsibly with, let's call it as predictable as possible, results from these LLMs.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate you leading with making sure that we're leaning into our values as we think about how we want to do this for the future. And Narain, looking to you as the leader for Virginia Tech Sangani Center for AI and data analytics, I know you and many of us are thinking a lot about how we train the workforce of the future, how we work with our students, what we teach in our classes, and we heard our provost speak to that a few minutes ago. Could you just comment a little bit about what topics really are essential for students to master today, what's new and different, and what's evergreen that hasn't changed, And certainly you're thinking a lot about it for computer science students and computer engineering students, but for all of our students, how should we be thinking about that from an educational perspective?
Thank you, Dean Ross. So this is a very important topic, and Provost Clark mentioned this example. We are always impressed when an LLM does something, but usually the reason we're impressed is because we're actually able to verify the answer, that we know how to verify the answer. So sometimes it's easier to verify the answer than to come up with an answer in the first place. So this is a big topic in computer science, right? How do you teach students what tasks can be automated? And after it's been automated, how do you verify? How do you put the checks and balances? How do you put the guardrails to make sure it's done right? So we are doing this across the curriculum. It's not just the AI courses. In fact, we are revamping our freshman and sophomore level courses. You now have coding assistants who can write the programs for you. But then after the program is written, how do you know it's correct, right? Do you have the basic understanding to validate it and so on? So you can think of a complete retooling of the curriculum around AI, right? Where there's a human AI element, collaboration happening, where we rethink almost every aspect of what we are teaching. Whether you're teaching programming, whether you're teaching some type of data science and so on. But the conceptual breakthroughs are still always going to be important, right? And I think my panelists talked about this. There's going to be a lot of tooling around the AI, which is still going to be fixed and standard. So you still need all the ability to understand how this fits in the larger context. A final thing that we emphasize is the ethics and professionalism of AI, right? So we want students to be a little bit conscientious about how they are using AI, what are the issues that come about. Think everything from copyright infringement to discrimination by algorithms. We have a lot of bad, nefarious examples from generative AI. So we want people to be a little bit conscientious about all that. So I mean, a lot of these courses are already updated. So I think you'll see a lot more changes coming along. So we are living in very, very interesting times.
Dynamic times. We have a lot of curriculum development work to do ahead of us, I know. Eric, let's go to you now and talk a little bit about how AI systems can improve our real-time decision-making in critical sectors like healthcare and finance, and what challenges these systems face as we think about data integrity and reliability.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it was brought up earlier. Going forth, I get to have the privilege of agreeing with my prior panelists on comments they made. It was brought up earlier that many of these foundation models, they're very large models, but they're trained on mostly publicly available data that is not tuned towards any specific application. And so, that's the source of a lot of what we hear about as hallucinations. I look at a large language model as like essentially an AI brain that we've trained up to the level of like an 8th grader. And you can ask it questions about legal precedent and it'll give you answers, but there's no reason to expect that those answers would be correct, and correspond to case law or things like that. And so similarly for the health space or the financial space. And so, I think that the period of time that we're moving into now, a lot of the splash that's been made is large language models and just the ability to interact and converse almost as if you were conversing with the language capabilities of a person. The era that we're moving into now is more specialized, trained on data that is not publicly available likely, probably not, for lack of a better term, very clean data, or perhaps needs to have quite a lot of data science applied to it before it's ready to be brought into a more specialized model. And even then, especially in the case of, say, like healthcare data, digitization of health records is still an ongoing process for a lot of health systems, right. which is a tragic thing to think about when we're this far into the digital era. But that's the reality, because they're understaffed, and it's not like every hospital system across the U.S., especially in rural areas, has data scientists at their beck and call, right? It hasn't historically been core to their business model, and so, anyways, that's slowly changing. So, I think that the ability to get what they already own as an actually very sophisticated data set into an appropriate format so that it can be brought into a specialized model. And then for some systems, not for health, but perhaps for finance, and certainly this is something we found in specialized areas like self-driving vehicles, for example, the ability to have simulated environments that generate an enormous amount of synthetic data that can be high quality, but also cover, let's say, situations that you may have to run a lot of real-time training on if you want to encounter in the real world. You can create in a simulated environment very, very quickly. And so the ability to generate a lot of synthetic data depends on high fidelity, high quality simulated environments, which is its own sort of separate thing, but is a very rich source of specialized data. And we have not, I would say like the tip of the iceberg is only just visible on that, but that's a huge area as well, the ability to generate synthesized simulated data.
Great, thank you. Really excited about this next question because it really, I think, is going to give us a sense of just the breadth of things that you all are thinking about. If you each could share an innovative AI project that your organization is exploring or you're thinking about, but those things that you're really excited about that get you out of bed in the morning. Like,
There's a lot of things.
And if you only get to pick one, so I'm dying to know what that one is.
But, yeah, there's a fine line also of picking one and then what's proprietary versus, is
Fair.
very well to share. But I think if I put the lens on from my perspective, working with customers and what we're hearing from customers and what's next, and I know we had a panelist up here before in the Pfizer HCLS space, right? But I think the healthcare and life sciences is an extremely exciting area. I talked a little bit about the chatbots and text summarization. Everyone's kind of probably rolling their eyes, yeah, all that stuff. Everyone knows about that. But the really cool, innovative stuff that's going to change the world and change it in a lot of ways for the better. You look at things like drug discovery, and actual development and modeling of proteins and molecules in ways that would take a lifetime for us to try and design, can be done relatively quickly and in a new, innovative, really rapid, iterative approach. And so cutting down the 10s and 20s and just decades it takes to do something like a drug discovery in some cases, cutting that down to a couple years is phenomenal, right? And I am really looking forward to seeing the impact to all of us in that. Of course, what comes with that is all the regulatory, the compliance, the HIPAA, the privacy, the security, the guardrails, the ethical considerations of being able to use data to do things like that. Super important. So there's a lot of challenges in that space, and I love hard, complex problems. But when I think about what's next and on the edge that really gets me excited, I think that space is one that we're going to see some really pioneering work to be done.
Great, thank you. Steve?
So last week we had our big event out in San Francisco called Dreamforce that brings tens of thousands of folks together. And one of the major announcements there for Salesforce was something called Agentforce. And the idea of agents is, think of a agent that you give a role to, you give them access to data, a list of actions, and these are software agents that can then be maybe develop sales leads or handle service questions, either in an assistive or automated way. And the way our CEO, Mark Benioff, teed it up was kind of like your first experience being in a Waymo. And I'm curious, I took my first 2 rides in a Waymo last week. How many have been in a self-driving car? Okay, yeah. So a pretty small fraction, but a number of you. It's wild. You sit in and there's no driver. It is driving you around the streets of San Francisco. It's a Jaguar car, like you feel like it's a substantial car. But we're entering kind of this world of Waymo moments. And I think Agentforce and agents, assistive and autonomous, it's a bit like that eye-opening moment. And I'll give you an example. So we had an activation on the 2nd floor of Moscone, the conference center in San Francisco. And this was build your first agent. And here's what it was. we would sit in a table that's like this, and there's a microphone there, and you are facilitating the discussion, and you say, just describe your business. And I say, well, we're a business, we sell this kind of product, our customers call in with these kinds of questions, our customer service reps have access to this type of data, they resolve it in this type of way. All of that's being recorded, transcribed, passed through a prompt, and it builds the agent that can actually answer those questions. For me, this was a mind-blowing moment. It was that Waymo moment. Of course, it's not wired up to any of your back-end systems yet or anything like that. That's where Data Cloud comes in. But in the week of Dreamforce last week, companies built over 10,000 of these agents. And so they are going to proliferate. They're here. This Waymo moment is here. So again, falling back on that value of trust, that becomes key. But that's it's a really cool innovation. It's very early days. It's one of those moments that's like, okay, where is this going? We need to do this responsibly, but it's super exciting at the same time.
Great. Narain, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, so I'd like to mention a project which is led by one of my colleagues, Dr. Pinar Yanadag. She's with the Department of Computer Science and with the Sangani Center. And this is an application of generative AI that I think we can all get behind. And what she's doing is she's working with physicians at Children's National Hospital to diagnose newborns who might have rare genetic conditions, right? And the problem is the machine learning models they use do not have a data that is representative of all the ethnography, all the ethnicities and the backgrounds, right? So you have more data from one subpopulation, less data from a different subpopulation, and so on. So the classifiers are not universally good when you apply them on such a diverse set of patients. So what she's done is she's using generative AI to create synthetic images of babies having specific genetic abnormalities, conditions, and so on. And then they train the machine learning model on that synthetically augmented data set, right? So the new models are like 20 to 30% better than the original models. So imagine a doctor in a country that does not have access to a lot of the resources that we might have. They could just take an image with their camera, they could run it through a classifier, which has been trained with this generative AI augmented information, and lo and behold, they'll be able to get a diagnosis. So I think, this is a very compelling application, much better than deep fakes or, writing emails that you may or may not have written. So,
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, I'll first complain about having to pick one. Maybe I'll say up front, here's a couple examples I'm not going to talk about. That's sort of cheating. Areas like we have what we call a digital twin of Earth. We call Earth 2. That's one of the most sophisticated simultaneous climate and weather simulators. So you can do projections into the future, predict things like what would happen in the case of 100-year, 500-year floods, and how would that affect certain areas. So there's a lot of I would call global scale sorts of models that we're involved in. But the one I actually really want to talk about, I do a lot of interactions with Congress, congressional staffers, the administration, especially recently on questions of the energy use of mostly training, but then looking towards the future. Of course, there is an expectation that eventually a substantial portion of the energy use will be on inferencing and actually using these models. And so there's a lot of focus on how that happens at the data center, the energy consumption that happens there. And I think that there's an idea, there's like a math equation people have in their head that it's kind of like chips plus energy equals AI. And AI consumes these resources, and they're very precious resources, especially energy, because there's communities compete for energy resources, right? So if I have a data center and the energy is going there, maybe now it gets more expensive for my grid users or whatever that might be. And so, I don't think that math equation is wrong, but what I actually think is happening is there's an opportunity for a virtuous cycle to emerge where the development of AI and the application of it for energy systems as an example has the opportunity to greatly enhance the efficiency just of the system itself, but then also get us closer to breakthroughs in energy and things like fusion and things like that. I think that makes sense to people, so I'll put that aside briefly, because there's another virtuous cycle that's happening on the chip side, because the efficiency and power of the chips is the other side of that equation that tells you, in a sense, how much AI do you get out of the data center per unit of energy you put in. We've developed a platform internally that we call Chip Nemo, which is essentially a large language model that we've loaded all of our chip design files ever since the early 90s into it to be an AI assistant for chip design for our internal engineers. And so it's not designing its own chips, I'll say yet, maybe it never will. It's not designing its own chips, but it's a very powerful AI tool for our chip engineers to make better chips, make more efficient chips, and find breakthroughs in chip design. And so, I shouldn't look at AI just as something that consumes energy or consumes chips. We're finding opportunities to plug it back in at the beginning, find a virtuous cycle where, yes, the AI uses chips, but the AI also makes the chips more powerful. And so when we go through those cycles, the chips become better because it has access to more powerful AI, and every time you iterate that, you enhance the whole system collectively.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
No, it's a great point. The one, as I think forward and look forward on things, there's the energy consumption, and you're seeing already, I think, changes from some of the major tech companies around energy and the consumption. It was talked about by Senator Warner today, how to deal with that. There's the scale of running these things from an algorithmic perspective and processing. Obviously, to do that, you need the infrastructure in place to do it. The one area that also, I think, is extremely important to go alongside the chips. So you have Moore's Law, and these chips are going to continue to get better and better and faster and faster. I'm sure NVIDIA will continue to do it's the wonderful thing it's doing, as well as other manufacturers. There's also the connection of the bandwidth between the chips themselves, right? If they're so powerful, we have to make sure that from a memory perspective and actually moving the data around and moving the processing around has to keep up as well. So there's a lot to all of this that I think is beyond just chips and energy as well, right? That if any of it starts to fall behind, it's a bottleneck for the rest of it, right? And so continuing to innovate on that and iterate and put AI in the different parts of the evolution, and I would say the ecosystem that you're pointing out there is a really good point to think about. There's a lot of depth there.
Yeah, you're giving me a lot to think about on the fly.
Yeah,
here.
sorry. Yeah, no, I mean, I was thinking about my mind's
Yeah,
racing on these
absolutely.
topics, and it's an interesting space. But it's something you have to consider all around. We talk about just the responsibility piece of it with just the data, which is, again, from like a software perspective. But there's absolutely on the hardware side and infrastructure components of this that all have to be moving and synchronized in a way that makes sense and is done responsibly.
Yeah, all great points. And that leads me to thinking about this next question. Steve, I'm going to go to you with this one. What's the right balance as we think about human intuition and AI analytics and decision-making processes? And how do we think about the role of the human in all of this as we go forward?
Yeah, that is a great question. I tend to think about this, at least in the current time, as kind of, okay, there's back office and front office use of this technology, at least in my world with Salesforce. And I think in the back office, it will be more evolution as we move forward, and maybe in the front office, a bit more revolution. And so in back office, I'm thinking things like the analyst that's doing maybe business intelligence, right? And creating traditional analytics, and they're gonna have great tools to help their productivity and help them do their job better. And I think that's gonna be a virtuous cycle that is highly productive. But it's quite evolutionary, I think, in terms of what they'll be doing. On the front office side, as I mentioned with assistive and autonomous agents and this ability to have these agents that are doing work on your behalf, right? Maybe you're a salesperson and you've got fully automated sales development rep, somebody out there that's just delivering you up these qualified leads to go against. So what's the human input there? Well, they're doing their job better. That is, they're increasing their productivity, but they're also providing kind of a check and balance around what the AI is doing as well, which is so important. So yeah, the human in the loop is still really important in these early days for checking on this. There's bias in these models. It's been trained up on the public internet. Fall back on a foundation of trust. These are all things that humans are really good at and are going to be important for still quite a while to come.
Great, thank you. I feel like we could have this conversation all morning. You've given me a lot to think about. I want to just think back in time, and maybe as a closing question to each of you, and Eric, we can start down on your end this time. If y'all got to wave the magic wand and go back in time, and I don't know, you can choose whether it's 1 year or 5 years or 10 years, but if you got to go back and do something a little differently to prepare your organizations to invest in or to think about differently than maybe you did at the time, as you think about the technological advances of AI, what would it be if you got to go back and change something?
You know, that's a very hard one for me to answer, because if I had ideas for how to better prepare our organization for AI technology than our CEO, Jensen, then I should be the one sitting in the CEO seat. So I'm not going to do a better job than Jensen has. Certainly that's been reflected in our recent surge into the data center space. But I think that, you know, the wave the magic wand, go back in time for how you better prepare for, you know, really integration of these systems at scale. We're a hardware company, so it was mentioned earlier, but you know, it is only in this very most recent generation of chip products that we produce where serious efficiency gains have come because of the networking at scale in the data center, which rapidly becomes bottlenecks for where your AI, you know, can achieve efficiency, and you know, you'd actually be astonished at the failure rate at the data center of hardware in training of large language models. A lot of that comes from the fact that you have to have hundreds of thousands of cores hooked up to each other to run these models. And so, you know, preparing for integration at scale, I think, is something that came upon everyone very, very rapidly, and it's not that we don't have solutions now, but that's where the need for a lot of the solutions is right now. So, you know, I'd say it's never too early to prepare for scale and to understand that's where you're going to face bottlenecks.
Thank you. Narain?
Yeah, so Dean Ross, I'll answer your question from an education point of view. There was a tweet I saw some time back which basically said, if I had known about neural networks, I would have paid attention in calculus class. And so I show it to all my students. I tell them, there are things you're going to learn, and believe me, they will be relevant at some point in the future. Nobody knows yet what it is. So all the topics that you thought were boring and not you know, interesting enough, like linear algebra, differential calculus, graph theory, today, if you know those topics, you'd be making a killing in the AI market. So in terms of how to prepare yourself for the future, you know, as a university, we go back to foundations. These are always going to be important, you know, whatever form AI takes, whatever the next revolution looks like. And so that's it's a boring answer, but I think it's
Back to basics.
a time-told answer.
Perfect, thanks.
So going back, I'll pick two things, and there are actually a couple of things that we did do, but I want to reinforce them, because one is education and two is values. So on the education side, so Sarah Franklin is the keynote speaker later today. She's the CEO of Lattice. But before that, she was president and chief marketing officer at Salesforce. And before that, she was head of our platform. So a phenomenal executive. But something that she and her team did, this is now almost 10 years ago, was bring to market Trailhead, which is Salesforce's online self-service learning platform, free to everyone to learn this technology. And it started out with just a few dozen modules. Now it's up in the thousands of modules to not just learn the Salesforce platform, but to learn about AI, to learn about bias in AI. I did a search on bias. There's over 100 modules just on that in Trailhead. So I just really have to thank her and her team for the vision that they had almost a decade ago. And they made the technology approachable too. And Salesforce has just pledged $150 million for AI education specifically. Then on the value side, I kind of started with that, and I'll end with it, like trust, customer success, innovation, equality, sustainability. Those are the Salesforce values, but equality and sustainability have been around for quite a while as values, but now they're more important than ever. We've talked about sustainability and bias in models, so how do you apply those lenses? So thinking deeply about that, to have some guideposts as we navigate these choppy waters is really important.
Great, thank you. And Ray?
Yeah, the waters are choppy. And I think, when I think of this question and going back to, how far back, 5 years, whatever, I'll put a customer lens on it. And when I think about our customers and the conversations I have with them now around, hey, we want to do it too. We're a Me Too. My CTO is telling me to go do Gen AI. Okay, what is the problem you're trying to solve, and work backwards. And you may or may not be surprised at the number of these customer organizations that, had they invested in their data foundations 5 or 10 years ago, right now they realize how important it is. Oh, I need to have clean data. It needs to be prepped. There may be some machine learning up front to get the data ready, to be able to take advantage of these models and tune them and have it work for my business and drive the outcomes I want. Data foundations isn't a new concept, and that was something that was being pushed around big data and those types of things back. But a lot of companies weren't quite ready. They didn't quite have the data governance in place yet. Now they're getting it in place very quickly, which is great to be able to take advantage of the technology inflection point we're at. Had they done that 5 or 10 years ago, I think we would be in maybe a little bit of a different place for some of these companies that really want to take advantage of it now. So that would be kind of where I would look, is taking that more seriously, go back to the basics of the data foundations, the security models, understanding your data, because none of this happens in the way that we want it to, or that we're seeing it happen, without good data, responsible data, and use of that with our customers.
Great, well, thank you so much. And I just want to end this session with a few reflections from a higher ed organizational perspective to say, I'm starting my 8th year as Dean of Engineering at Virginia Tech, and if I got to go back and do it all over again, I think I would really lean in even more heavily than I did around our organizational agility and our ability to be responsive to all of those changes. And so agile and responsive are not always the 2 words you think of first when we think of higher education and how it works. But I think at Virginia Tech right now, we are really leaning into the role that we can play to really solve all of these problems in partnership with all of you, and to make sure that we're working on the right things and we're moving as quickly as we can to produce the workforce that we need for the future. And so, if I got to go back again, we leaned into it pretty heavily. I'd lean into it even harder. I think the pandemic showed us what's possible in higher education. And now we need to just keep that pressure on to make sure we're evolving the way we need to support all of you in this room. So thank you so much for this panel. For all of our panelists, please join me in thanking them. And I think we're ready for a 10-minute break now as we move on to the next part of our program. Thank you all.